If you are not cool with that, please leave now. Also, any sort of reactions are not allowed. You cannot speak out, you cannot make noise, unreasonable noise. You can sneeze or whatever, but no like aiming any comments toward any party, aiming eye contact or facial gestures or body gestures towards any party. Anything of that nature will get you removed from the courtroom for the duration of the trial. All right, is there anything we need to take up before we bring the jury back in?
No, Your Honor.
All right, and when I bring them in and have them seated, I'm going to go ahead and have their phones collected as well, okay? Thank you.
All rights for the jury.
I think there's two more coming.
Everyone here? Judge, all 15 jurors are accounted for.
Thank you. And Deputy Mills, if you want to come up to the jury box and get phones. So you all can sit down. While we're in the courtroom, your phones will go somewhere where you cannot access them. And when we go on breaks, we'll get them back. Thank you all for passing down. I appreciate that. Thanks, y'all. All right, now, ladies and gentlemen, as I was saying earlier, we are ready to proceed with the trial of this case. You have been sworn in as jurors in the case of Commonwealth versus Brice Jamar Rhodes. Mr. Rhodes is charged with 3 counts of murder, 1 count of tampering with physical evidence, and 1 count of abuse of a corpse. I'm going to read the indictment to you. Under count 1, the allegation is that on or about the 4th day of May, 2016 in Jefferson County, Kentucky, Brice Jamar Rhodes, acting alone or in complicity with another or others, committed the offense of murder by intentionally or under circumstances manifesting extreme indifference to human life, wantonly caused the death of Christopher Jones. Count 2, that on or about the 22nd day of May, 2016 in Jefferson County, Kentucky, Brice Jamar Rhodes, acting alone or in complicity with another or others, committed the offense of murder by intentionally or under circumstances manifesting extreme indifference to human life, wantonly caused the death of Maurice Gordon. Count 3, that on or about the 22nd day of May 2016 in Jefferson County, Kentucky, Brice Jamar Rhodes, acting alone or in complicity with another or others, committed the offense of murder by intentionally or under circumstances manifesting extreme indifference to human life, wantonly caused the death of Larry Ordway. Count 4, that on or about the 22nd day of May 2016 in Jefferson County, Kentucky, Brice Jamar Rhodes, acting alone or in complicity with another or others, committed the offense of tampering with physical evidence when, believing that an official proceeding may be pending or instituted against him, he destroyed, mutilated, concealed, removed, or altered the physical evidence which he believed was about to be produced or used in such official proceeding with the intent to impair its verity or availability in the official proceeding. Count 5, that on or about the 22nd day of May 2016 in Jefferson County, Kentucky, Brice Jamar Rhodes, acting alone or in complicity with another or others, committed the offense of abuse of corpse when, not authorized by law, he intentionally treated a human corpse in a way that would outrage reasonable family sensibilities. And count 6, that on or about the 22nd day of May 2016 in Jefferson County, Kentucky, Brice Jamar Rhodes, acting alone or in complicity with another or others, committed the offense of abuse of corpse when, not authorized by law, he intentionally treated a human corpse in a way that would outrage reasonable family sensibilities. I'd like to briefly tell you how we'll proceed. In this case, just like any criminal case, the Commonwealth will make an opening statement. The defense then will have an opportunity to make an opening statement if they wish to do so. Opening statements are not evidence, but they are an opportunity for the attorneys to advise you up front of what they think the evidence will be and what will be important to pay attention to. After opening statements, then evidence begins being presented. The Commonwealth will present evidence in the form of sworn testimony by witnesses or by exhibits. At the conclusion of the Commonwealth's evidence, the defense may present evidence, but they are not required to do so. At the conclusion of all of the evidence, I will instruct you on the law that you must apply to this case, and I will read instructions to you, which you will also get a copy of. After I have instructed you on the law of the case, the attorneys will have a chance to make closing arguments to you, which again are not evidence, but are an opportunity for them to sum up what they believe the evidence did show and perhaps how you should find. Now, I've talked to you a lot about the admonitions in this case, but I'm going to go through it one more time and will remind you upon leaving that you must follow the admonition as well. You must decide this case based solely on the evidence presented here within the four walls of this courtroom. During this trial, you may not use internet search engines, websites, blogs, or use any other electronic tools to conduct any research about this case, to post information about this case, or to help you deliberate on this case. During the course of the trial, you are not to communicate online with anyone connected to the trial, including witnesses, lawyers, other jurors, experts. Do not record or photograph any part of these court proceedings because that is prohibited by law. If you accidentally encounter information about the case from any source outside of these four walls, it is your duty to bring it immediately to the attention of the court. All right, Mr. Cunningham, are you ready for opening?
The Commonwealth is ready now.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, callous and casual was the first murder. The two that followed were calculating and cruel. In May of 2016, Brice Rhodes snuffed out the life of Christopher Jones, Larry Ordway, and Maurice Gordon. The evidence is going to show that these acts occurred basically as two acts. And so if this were a play, these would be the characters that are involved in the first act. We have Maurice Gordon and Larry Ordway. Despite having different last names, these two are brothers that live together. They went to school at Olmsted. They liked playing basketball. They enjoyed rapping. They were always hanging out together. They had a home. They had a family. But from time to time, they would be out of the house for a few days. That wouldn't be anything unusual for them. They were born 2 years apart and a day, so they almost had the same birthday. And unfortunately, they both died on the same day, which we'll get to a little bit later. So these two brothers that were always hanging out together, 16 years old and 14-year-old, were friends with several people, one of which was Ja'Cory Taylor. Now, Ja'Cory, you're going to hear testimony from him. He's going to testify. He had a rough go. He had lost his job at White Castles. He was in and out of people's houses. He would stay in the stairwell at his girlfriend's house. He was just kind of on the boundary of things. And he was friends with both Larry and Maurice. And Ja'Cory goes by Corey also sometimes. And Maurice Gordon also goes by Rhodes. And they were mutual friends with Brice Rhodes, the defendant here, who went by Rambo. Rambo, Brice Rhodes, was 25 years old at the time in 2016 when he's hanging out with 14-year-olds and 16-year-olds. Ja'Cory was 17 years old. And there's one more person in the spring group. Antoine Carter, right here. And he goes by Buddha. And he was just a friend of theirs that would hang out. So, as they were hanging out, an idea came about. This is a picture of Larry and Maurice. Mr. Rhodes, the defendant. It's a picture of Antoine and a picture of Ja'Cory. Now I'm going to leave this up here just as a reference for you all, so when the names start going, you can look back. So, one night with Brice Rhodes, we came upon an idea. And the idea was basically there was a hit out on somebody. And they were going to kill that person and collect on it. Brice Rhodes was aware of this hit and knew who would pay on it and knew who the target was. So, on May the 4th, 2016, now keep in mind, all the events from this case happened in May of 2016. So, when you see witnesses on the witness stand, they don't look at all the same as they looked back then. And also, people's memories are a little bit different because this happened a while ago. So, the idea was this. They all hopped in a car on May the 4th, and Maurice was driving the car. It was a blue Mazda that was owned by the defendant, Mr. Rhodes. The front passenger seat was Larry. Brice Rhodes was in the back behind the driver's seat. And Corey Taylor was on the right behind the passengers. Trailing in a different vehicle was Antoine Carter. He's in a truck that's following behind this car. So it's nighttime, and they're driving around looking for this guy, looking to collect the price on his head. As they approach, picture of Antoine, who was the follow driver, who was 17 at the time. As they approach 41st Street, there's video of the car driving by, then video of the truck. What happened was a man was walking out in the streets, and he had long braids. So he looked like the guy that Brice Rhodes believed the hit was on. So Brice Rhodes rolled down his window. The guy was walking out of the street. Cars are parked in the road. He's walking out into this, away from the street, in between the cars. Brice Rhodes yells out the window to him, "Hey, get out the road, bitch," and then shoots him one time in the side. Bullet wound is going to go through his arm and into his side. Police are going to be alerted that there was a shooting and respond to the scene. The man on the pavement there is Christopher Jones. He had nothing to do with any hit or street business. He was just in the wrong place in the wrong time and ended up being shot. He was still alive, but non-responsive there at the scene. EMS took him to the hospital where he passed away. This is the intersection of the nearest street the police reported to. There's another picture of Mr. Jones. And this is a picture from the body cam of approximately where his body was in the road as the car drove by. You can see this is the clothes he was wearing, and some of the items that were on his person. And that's what he was reduced to after he was shot by Mr. Rhodes. You can see a single bullet wound in his arm, and then the entrance of the bullet wound that turned out to be fatal into his chest. So that's the end of what, if this were a play, if this wasn't so serious, we'd call the first act. Now, a couple different ways it happened, but essentially, Brice Rhodes became aware by overhearing a phone conversation with Ja'Cory talking to Maurice. that they were talking about the murder that had happened, but their family knew about it. And as soon as Mr. Rhodes knew that the boys were talking, even just to their family, he knew that they had to do something about these boys to keep them from talking, to cover up his first murder. So this is a black Dodge Charger that Mr. Rhodes had access to and often drove. And you're going to hear testimony that on the 22nd of May, just a couple of weeks later, this black Charger picked the boys, Larry and Maurice, up at their house. That was the last time that anybody from that apartment was going to see them alive again. So Maurice and Larry are obviously going to be the victims in this second act. And it's going to be carried out by a defendant named Tyrion Coleman, by Antoine Carter, who was involved earlier, and by Corey Taylor, and by Mr. Rhodes himself. So I'm going to leave that up there for your reference. So this is Brice Rhodes' apartment that he lived at with his mom. He had the boys over there. It was 4 of them, well, the 6 of them, 4 individuals listed there, Maurice, Larry, and another individual. And as the night got on, boys started wrestling around, and there was a little bit of a skirmish that broke out with Maurice. And so Brice Rhodes said it was time to discipline Maurice. Maurice had pulled out a knife on somebody, and so Brice hit him upside the head pretty hard, took him out. Then said, "It's time for you to be disciplined." So he went up to Maurice, put a toboggan on his head, pulled it down over his eyes so he couldn't see. And he tied his arms behind his back so that he couldn't move. And he made him beg for forgiveness and plead for his life, which he did. He was begging everyone in that room to spare him and apologizing and saying he was sorry. So Larry, his brother, was taken and held in a different room. And from Larry's room, he could hear his brother pleading for his life. He could hear what happened to his brother. And what happened to his brother is that he was punched a few times by Mr. Taylor. And then Brice Rhodes took a knife and began stabbing him over and over and over again. In the chest, in the midsection, and in the genitals. He was screaming and crying out for help, and his brother was helpless a room away to do anything about it. When they were finally done, they rolled Maurice over, and then they brought Larry into the room. And then they repeated the process. Took the toboggan off, they put it on Larry's head. They put something over Larry, and they started stabbing him till he died there in that apartment. Brice's mom and sister, who shared that apartment with him, were out of town that weekend. So he had the place to himself. He had the people involved help him take the body of the boys and put them in some totes, which he then carried down and put in the back of his Mazda. Some in the back seat, and one of them in the back seat, and one of them in the trunk. And then he drove off. Now he left Anwan and Jacory at the house to clean up because there was blood all over the carpet. He gave them cleaning supplies and he gave them towel. And just for good measure, because his mom was out of town, he had them also do his dishes while they were scrubbing up the blood. He and other individuals went and dropped the body of the boys off, dropped their bodies off. He also set fire to the items that were associated with the stabbing and left it in a dumpster. Dropped the bodies off around 4028 River Park Drive, which you can see from the area is near the park, near Wyandotte Park where they play ball. So on the 22nd day of May, this is what somebody in the neighborhood discovered. 2 boys mutilated, stabbed, set on fire, and left like trash. So the boys' parents are starting to wonder where they're at when they don't come home after the first day. And so mom gives them a call. Well, the person that answers the phone isn't Maurice. It's Antoine Carter. And he tells her, kids are fine. They're doing something else. I just borrowed the phone. So police discover the 2 bodies. And eventually they have sketch artists come out. They can't get fingerprints because the bodies are too badly burned. They have sketch artists come out and draw a picture of how the boys looked, and they're looking for, checking news stories for missing boys. Eventually, they find that there's 2 boys that are missing from Olmsted School, and they have the boy's mother come out, and she identifies that, yes, that's them. From there, police realize a couple things. They know who the boys left with that night. They know that it was Mr. Rhodes. They also know that they left with Antoine Carter and Jacory Taylor. So police track the phone, and eventually it leads them to Antoine Carter. And Antoine Carter eventually ends up talking to police and explaining what happened after some little bit of give and take. He finally got to the story of what happened. About this same time, police pick up Brice Rhodes, and he gives a short statement, which you will hear. Police go out to Brice Rhodes' house once they've heard what happened, and they start pulling up the carpet from his house. And when they do a DNA analysis on that carpet, of course, they find the blood of the 2 brothers is there on the carpet. Police also learn that after this event, after that night, when Brice Rhodes comes back from dropping the bodies off, he picks up the 2 boys that were left to clean up the house. Jacory had with him the boots that he wore in the house. And he left those boots at a girlfriend's house. And so police got a search warrant. They go to that girlfriend's house, and those boots, the DNA on those boots, comes back to the boys as well, corroborating what was said earlier. He also gives a statement to police, and it pretty much matches the statement of Antoine Carter that I've just relayed to you. So Here's a picture of the apartment, how cleanly the flooring was stripped from Brice Rhodes' place. Another thing that police did once the investigation got underway was they went and looked at Brice Rhodes' blue Mazda that had transported the two victims in the tote sacks. And you'll notice this is a picture of the back seat of the Mazda. All the cloth seating has been ripped out of it. And this is a picture of Jacory at the police station giving his statement. You can see, I want you to remember how young he truly is. At this point in time, he is 5'5", weighs 122 pounds. Brice Rhodes is a 25-year-old grown man. This picture of the boots that were recovered from the girlfriend's house. You're going to hear from a lot of different people that are going to come through here. The police that were involved with both of these investigations that had to piece together that the two investigations were connected and take over. So there's going to be two different lead officers. You're going to hear from experts in, you're going to hear from the medical examiner. You're going to hear from CSU professionals. You're going to hear everything that the police did to make sure that the three victims in this case get justice. And I hope at the conclusion of the Commonwealth's case, you will give them that justice. Thank you.
Counsel, could you approach for just one moment? Sorry. Yeah, I'm just waiting for Miss Jones Brown to return. If everybody who's already seated could move in towards the wall, please, and make room for anyone else who wants to come in during this break. Please have a seat. All right, would the defense like to make an opening statement now?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, please go ahead.
I stabbed him. I stabbed Maurice in his side. I drove on him. I ran him over. Ladies and gentlemen, these are quotes from someone involved in this case, but these are not quotes from Brice Rhodes. These statements were made by Ann One Carter. Ann One Carter talking about killing his best friend, Maurice Gordon, and running over a helpless Christopher Jones. Ann One Carter is the prosecution's main witness in this trial. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I'm so glad that you're here. I'm thankful that you're here. I know Brice is also grateful that you are here because he has waited a long time for you all to hear the evidence. The evidence, or the lack thereof, will show you that Brice Rhodes is not guilty of these accusations. The burden of proof being beyond a reasonable doubt, why do we keep talking about that? I know you've heard that many times already. Our system, our government makes it so difficult to take someone's freedom that we can't let the government make any mistakes. And we want to be sure that no one is ever wrongfully convicted, especially in a situation where the stakes are this high. The government has made some very serious accusations against Brice. And I'm not here to undermine the loss that the families and the community have suffered as a result of these senseless deaths. But I'm here to make sure that nobody is wrongfully convicted, and that's why you are here. As jurors in this case, you guys have a great responsibility. But with that responsibility also comes a great power. You all have the power to hold the government to their burden of proving Brice Rhodes guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. You have the power to say no. You have the power to say we are not convinced. And the power to know that that decision is okay. So how do you make that decision? As Ms. Jones-Brown told you earlier, none of us can define reasonable doubt for you. That's up to you as a juror. That's up to you as an individual. So what are you going to use to make this determination? You will hear evidence over the next several days. You will decide what evidence you find credible, what witnesses you find believable. So what evidence do you all expect to see to help you make this decision? It's a very important decision. Eyewitnesses, that might be good. I think you'll find that there aren't any eyewitnesses who were not themselves involved in these crimes. There are no neutral witnesses. Do these witnesses have a motive to lie? Can we trust them? You might expect to see a murder weapon. There's not one. Is there physical evidence? Yes. Can it be trusted? That's up to you all to decide. Let's talk about the physical evidence. The Louisville Metro Police Department found tire tracks and footprints at the scene where Larry and Maurice's bodies were found. The tire tracks could not be linked to Brice's vehicle. The footprints did not match Brice's shoes. Brice's fingerprints were not on any evidence. Brice Rhodes' DNA was not found on any evidence except for on the steering wheel and the gear shift of his own vehicle. Let's talk about Brice's car. The Commonwealth showed you a picture of the Mazda. Louisville Metro Police Department searches Brice's car and claims that the entire back seat of Brice's light blue Mazda had been removed in an effort to conceal evidence of these crimes. No DNA linking Brice to those crimes was recovered in that car. You'll hear that Brice borrowed Chris Jensen's black Charger to drive these boys around. And when you hear from Mr. Jensen, note that he is not going to be able to say that anyone was with Brice when he picked up that black Charger, nor was anyone with Brice when he dropped off that black Charger to Mr. Jensen. These are things to consider. I want to give you an alternate perspective, if you will, than what the government has. Have they accused the right person, or was Brice an easy target to blame? Has the one who already committed these crimes pled guilty? I ask you all to listen to the evidence, observe the witnesses, and ask yourselves if something isn't quite right here. The evidence will show that there is a reasonable doubt that Brice Rhodes is guilty. Let's talk about the detectives in this case. As you all know, the Louisville Metro Police Department was the agency responsible for investigating both of these murders, both scenes, or excuse me, both incidents on May 4th and then again on May 22nd. And there were two lead detectives, as the Commonwealth told you, Detective Griffin and Detective Tonelli, and you'll hear from both of them. But I want you to think about how many hands were involved in this case. When it comes to handling evidence, interviewing witnesses, executing search warrants, mistakes were made. And I want you to think, can we rely on every person that works for the Louisville Metro Police Department? You will learn that the Louisville Metro Police Department investigated these homicides, and once again, this is the same force that murdered Breonna Taylor.
Yes. Ladies and gentlemen, at this point in the case, there has not been any evidence presented that links any information in this case to the case of Breonna Taylor. I'm going to admonish you to disregard counsel's last statement at this point.
Ladies and gentlemen, even if you find Detective Tonelli and Detective Griffin, the two lead detectives in this case, as I mentioned, there were so many hands in this case. Can you rely on everyone else that works for Louisville Metro Police Department? Detective Tonelli lied under oath about one of the biggest pieces of physical evidence that the police possessed. He told the court under oath not once, but twice, that law enforcement had a piece of evidence that they did not have and do not have. So you might be asking yourself, I can see how some evidence could be lost. Maybe it was a tiny piece of hair. Maybe it was a speck of DNA. That seems reasonable. Ladies and gentlemen, no, it was an entire back seat of a car. It's gone. You know how I told you earlier that police stated that Brice's back seat had been removed. Detective Tonelli told a judge and then a grand jury, that the Louisville Metro Police Department had found and collected a burnt back seat from a dumpster that matched Brice Rhodes' back seat. And now it's gone. I am mystified as to how you lose a piece of evidence that big. It's huge. It's a huge piece of evidence, not only physically, but to the case as well. So in an effort to get Brice charged, the court was misled, the grand jury was misled about a piece of evidence in the LMPD's possession. Did they lie under oath about having it? Or did they dispose of it because it didn't help their case? You all decide that. The Louisville Metro Police Department searched the home of Brice's mother, where he was residing on Hyde Avenue in Louisville, 2 times. The first search, officers found nothing incriminating. They even commented on how clean the apartment was. The crime scene unit was there, detectives were there, officers were there. It was a big search. Nothing was found. And then they decide to just go back. The officers go back, decide to search the home again, and now claim that they have found evidence that Larry and Maurice were killed there. Now there's suddenly blood there. First of all, is that how search warrants work? You keep going back until you find something, and if you don't find anything, you find a way to come back and find something. If at first you don't succeed, try again, huh? But that's not how search warrants work, ladies and gentlemen. Despite all of those officers being there, I've never seen a video recording of the search at Hyde Avenue. There's nothing for you all to watch to see what actually happened. I want you to consider that when you hear about how the evidence was collected. Consider that reasonable doubt as to the guilt of Mr. Rhodes. I want to talk to you all about the investigation in this case, or the lack thereof. I think it's fair to say that you all could conclude that the police had tunnel vision in this case. And when I say tunnel vision, I mean that they focused in on Brice Rhodes, excluding all other possible suspects. Elizabeth Wren, the mother of Larry and Maurice, was the first to point the finger at Brice Rhodes. But why? She didn't see anything. So what was her problem with Brice? Was it their romantic relationship had gone bad? I feel for her. She lost both of her sons. She's a grieving mother, and you will see that when she testifies. But I'm going to ask you to look past that and think about the part that she played in this. Consider the reliability of her statement. Evidence will show that she is a known drug user who was aware that her juvenile sons were hanging with Ja'Cory Taylor and Anwan Carter, were involved with guns, and even knew her son's friends bought a gun out of her own home. She was naturally distraught when she spoke to the police, but also very likely under the influence. And I'm not saying that to speak ill of her, but as a jury, you have to know that the police took her statement and did not investigate anyone else. The police didn't care that she hated Brice. The police didn't care that they had a relationship that went sour. The police didn't care that she hadn't actually seen anything. They already had a name, and she was happy to trash her ex-boyfriend. Ladies and gentlemen, no other suspects were investigated. Not a full investigation was done, as you might expect to see in a case of this magnitude. There were, however, other suspects to investigate. Just prior to the shooting of Christopher Jones, a Louisville Metro police officer reported a suspect in a white shirt, reported receiving a report of a suspect in a white shirt riding a bicycle and waving a gun around in the area. It's not a coincidence. It's a high crime area. It wasn't investigated. Another witness reported seeing a black Chrysler 300M near the scene of Christopher Jones's death, and even stated a person got out and messed with the body, but then fled before the police arrived. This was not investigated. Another possible suspect comes to light in the statements of Anwan Carter and Ja'Cory Taylor. They both described two other men being present at and participating in the murder of brothers Larry and Maurice. Tyrone Coleman was eventually charged and convicted. However, the other individual was not charged or even questioned. There is a reasonable doubt that Brice Rhodes is guilty. There's no clear motive for Brice to have committed these crimes. The police allege that Brice Rhodes shot and killed Christopher Jones in the presence of Ja'Cory Taylor, Anwan Carter, Larry Ordway, and Maurice Gordon. And then about 3 weeks later, the police think that Brice stabbed Larry and Maurice because Brice was afraid they would go to the police and rat. But the other two who were present are still alive. Anwan Carter and Ja'Cory Taylor were there, and they are still alive. Does this make sense to you? And I would like to talk about those co-defendants. I stabbed him. I stabbed Maurice in his side. I drove on him. I ran him over. Anwan Carter was facing life in prison for his actions against 3 innocent people. He was facing life in prison. And the prosecution said, that's okay. We'll give you probation. But to get the sweetheart offer, you got to give us someone else. Anwan Carter pled guilty to the murders of Christopher Jones, Maurice Gordon, Larry Ordway, and in exchange for that, the prosecution was okay with probation, or maybe a little prison, left it up to the judge, if you testify against Brice Rhodes. Anwan Carter gave a name, the police took it and ran with it. Up to that point, all they had was kids killing other kids. They wanted an adult to stick it to. And here we are. 2 people have already admitted to killing Christopher Jones. Anwan Carter and Ja'Cory Taylor. 3 people have already admitted to killing Larry Ordway and Maurice Gordon. Again, Anwan Carter and Ja'Cory Taylor, plus Tyrone Coleman. They have all pled guilty to their murders. So why are we here then? Because in order for those men to get very lenient deals from the government, they agreed to testify against Brice. The evidence will show you all that those responsible for the murders have already been convicted and are now trying to put the blame on Brice Rhodes. There is reasonable doubt that Brice Rhodes is guilty. The evidence will show that the testimony of Anwan Carter and Ja'Cory Taylor, who you will hear from, is not believable. Both of these men are known criminals. In fact, Anwan Carter is currently in prison right now in the state of Florida. Guess what for? Gun charges. He had a loaded weapon on him. So after he got his sweetheart deal here in Kentucky for killing 3 people, he went to the state of Florida, joined a gang, and again got arrested. He changed his statement at least 3 times to the police that I can think of. At first, Mr. Carter even told police, "I do not know Brice Rhodes. I've never been in a car with him." However, after having time to consult with Ja'Cory Taylor, a plan was concocted to point the finger at Brice Rhodes. These two, Taylor and Carter, had a chance to get their stories together. There weren't any suspects initially after the Christopher Jones murder, but about 3 weeks later, Larry and Maurice are killed. And one Carter wasn't questioned until about 2 days after that incident. So all of this time, Carter and Taylor had time to get their stories straight, to come up with a plan of how to get themselves out of this. A plan to make themselves look less guilty for murdering their best friends, Larry and Maurice. A plan to blame Brice. And one Carter admitted to running over Christopher Jones's body in a pickup truck that he had stolen, that Mr. Carter had stolen. Do you know what kind of vehicle witnesses reported seeing at the scene where Larry and Maurice's bodies were recovered? A pickup truck, not Brice's blue Mazda. And one Carter admitted to stabbing his best friend Maurice Gordon. Carter claims to have seen Brice Rhodes shoot Christopher Jones, but the evidence will show that what Anwan Carter in fact saw was a hand out the window shooting a gun. If you recall, Mr. Carter was in the vehicle behind where the shots were fired, the vehicle that the shots were fired from. It was dark outside, and Carter could not see the face of the shooter. Ja'Cory Taylor was in the back seat where the shots were fired and had just bought a gun from the boyfriend of Larry and Maurice's mother. And one Carter saw Ja'Cory Taylor buy the gun. There's reasonable doubt that Brice Rhodes is guilty. Ja'Cory Taylor admitted to buying that gun right before the shooting of Christopher Jones. He admitted to getting into an altercation with Maurice Gordon right before Maurice died. He admitted that Maurice Gordon pulled a knife on him. And then he admitted to stabbing Larry. Again, reasonable doubt. At the conclusion of the evidence, you will be asked to make a decision about Brice's fate. You have promised that in order to find anyone guilty, the government has first proven to you that that person is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. If the government has not done that, you all must find him not guilty. I stabbed him. I stabbed Maurice in his side. I drove on him. I ran him over. You all get to decide what is true, who you believe, and what is reliable. I ask you to use your power as jurors to tell the government you are not convinced. Tell them that the evidence is not sufficient, and tell them that we will not wrongfully convict Brice. Thank you.
Before we begin hearing testimony, does anyone want a short break, 5-minute break? Okay. Take a 5-minute break, just come back at 3:40.
All rise, jury.
Everybody's phone back over here. Does anybody need to report anything regarding the admonition? Perfect. I know it's very hot in here. You all need to take your coats off, whatever you need to do. It's So I'm going to try to get the big fan in here for tomorrow, something to get the air moving around. It's just when it's warmer outside, it gets very, very hot in here. All right. Commonwealth, are you ready to proceed?
We are, Your Honor.
You may call your first witness.
Your Honor, the Commonwealth is going to call Officer Thomas Franklin to stand.
Good afternoon. I could have you please raise your right hand. Please have a tell the truth and the whole truth. Thank you. Can I have a seat?
Good afternoon, Officer. Can you state your name for the ladies and gentlemen of the jury?
Officer Thomas Franklin,
And Officer Franklin, where are you employed?
Louisville Metro Police Department,
How long have you been with the police department?
roughly 10 and a half years.
And were you with the police department when this case occurred back on the second day of May of 2016?
Yes.
And how did you come to be involved in the case?
At the time, I was a patrol officer in the 1st Division on late watch. And I heard a shot fired while I was at roughly 28 in Broadway. Started going towards, and then was later updated that there was a shooting that had taken place with a victim, and therefore continued that direction.
So you actually heard the gunshot yourself, and then you became aware that
Yes, sir.
it was fired. And have you had an opportunity to review your body cam from that evening?
Yes.
And did it fairly and accurately reflect the events as they unfolded?
Yes, sir.
Move to admit and publish officer's body camera. It's actually going to be Commonwealth 6. I'll have 5 photos.
Thank you. So admitted.
Over there by that sidewalk, please. Hey, buddy, can you hear me? Can you hear me? We'll get to you in a second, all right? We just. Hey, where you shot at? Where you shot? Oh, here we go. Right here. Yeah, I got it. Hey, buddy, stay with me, all right? What's your name, man? Died, abdomen. One blow back up to the abdomen. He's breathing. He's not conscious or alert right now. Hey, buddy, what's your name? Hey, buddy. What's your name, man? Talk to us. Can you hear me? He's not really responding to anything. Yeah, good. Oh, here we go. Hey, you're good. You're good. You're good, buddy. Be still, man. Be still. Be still. EMS is here. Can you hear my boy? Can you hear me? What's your name? Got a wallet back here. He's moving his arm, but it's not like he's just responding to us. Right underneath this. I don't see an exit wound. Yeah, there's one patient over here. No, it's over here by EMS. Don't worry about it. You guys are fine. Yeah, only seen one. Right here underneath my arm. Yep. No, he's not responding to us. He's moving his arm though a little bit. He may have another shot right here. Yep, right there in the arm. Another one. You're fine. This one's a throw through. It looks like it went through this into him. Oh, I got it. You're fine. You're good. Today's fixed right now. Can you hold down for today? I don't know. It went into him. It's stuck in there. No exit. It went through the arm here into here.
Is that a night you remember pretty well? Safe to say.
Yes, sir.
Can you walk the jury through what do you do once you get the call? What steps do you follow?
This one, again, I was in the parking lot at 280 Broadway and actually heard the shot and started going that direction. At which time it's updated to a shooting with somebody that's been struck. I'm a first division officer that borders the second division. The actual location was in the second division. However, because of short bodies, people already on runs and things of that nature, I decided to continue to go anyways because I had determined based off what dispatch had been saying and whether people had been responding, I would still have been closer to help provide aid and continue to go that direction. So I continued going, observed EMS in the area beforehand, and notified radio that they were staging.
And I don't think I asked you. Do you remember what time it was that the call came out?
It was after midnight. We work 7 to 7 at that time, I believe, but 12-hour shifts. So it was after midnight, but not too early in the morning.
Said it was 1:50. Would you believe me?
Yes, sir.
So you pull in. We saw how fast your cruiser was going. You see somebody down. What's the next thing you're doing there at the scene?
Next thing I did is I grabbed a roll gauze, medical supplies from a glove box. Show up on scene. There was another officer there, and put on PPE, gloves. Then immediately went into trying to address wound, figure out where the wound was. Obviously, this is our victim here that we are attempting to help, and located the abdomen wound. Which time at the time putting pressure on was the best option. And based off my experience and training and everything that I've encountered up to that point in time in my career. Again, en route, I'd seen EMS, so I knew they were close by, and just take care of the scene as far as making sure that it's safe for them to get there with their higher level of medical expertise.
And may I approach, Your Honor?
You may.
Showing the witness what's been pre-marked exhibits 145. Are you familiar with these photos?
Yes, sir.
And they all fairly and accurately represent what they purport to be?
Yes.
Why don't you walk the jury through what these are photos of? This is it's Commonwealth's Exhibit 1 to admit and publish, Your Honor.
Yes. Oh, well, actually, sorry. I admitted and published. Should have checked with you first. I'm sorry. Thank you.
So the first picture was a driver's license. Why is that significant?
It was driver's license that was in the wallet that was located in Mr. Jones's pocket. He had longer hair that night than the picture.
And then we have a picture here of this intersection.
Yes, at the location, roughly close to the intersection.
And there's a picture of the numbers on this pole. Why is that significant?
I did not take those pictures. We used the numbers on the pole for years. LG&E uses them at specific geographical longitude, latitude locations. We've used them for our traffic accidents when reporting locations for traffic accidents in the past. But again, that picture I did not take. So.
And then this is Commonwealth's Exhibit 5. This is that same pole behind the car. Okay.
I'm sorry. Did you answer?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Sorry, I didn't hear you.
Yes, that's the vehicle from where the back bumper where Mr. Jones was at.
Focus just a little bit better. But what is this picture of?
That's the location that we found him in.
And there's items that are in the road.
Yes, as from the body camera to render medical aid, some clothing items were cut off, taken off to better allow the medical crew to address the wounds.
And that's what we saw happening in the video.
Yes, sir.
And then I want to show you this final picture here. There are yellow cones, numbered cones on the scene. What's the significance of that?
I did not place those cones. That would probably be a question for a detective. In the past, cones have been used to mark key pieces of evidence or things that they want specifically documented.
Things that you've identified as significant on the scene.
Yes, sir.
And so how long was it from the time that you showed up on the scene to the time that the victim was taken away in an ambulance?
The perception of time in an instance like that, it seems like it could take a long time or a short time. Everyone's is different. For me, again, it's documented on the video. I would better reference that video to answer that question.
And then did you do anything else of significance at the scene?
After I was done helping with aid and EMS was there, at that point in time, as a patrol officer, understanding this is now a crime scene, depending on what has already been done, crime scene tape was already in the process of being put up, at which point I went and people had started to gather and come outside because of the commotion and the lights and the sirens, and therefore just tried to identify anybody that may or may not have been around or seen or heard or anything like that to try and get information on them, to better identify them for a detective to follow up with.
Thank you, and please answer any questions for the defense.
Officer Franklin, I believe you told us that you are part of the 1st Division. Does that just refer to the area that you patrol?
Yes.
It's not a ranking of any sort?
Nope.
Okay. So you're a 1st Division officer on patrol that night?
Yes, that night I would.
Yes. And you testified that you were the first officer on scene that night?
One of the first officers on scene. The body camera video will show, again, going from 1st Division to 2nd Division, I'm not as familiar with all the streets. I was able to see another officer in front of me turn down the block, and then that's when the video kicked on, turn down the other block, and then come to the location.
So you were the first or maybe the second officer on scene.
Say so, yes.
And when you arrived, however, you were not the first person on scene, correct?
Correct, yeah.
Because EMS was already there.
Negative. EMS was not there. I would say there were other people, obviously bystanders. I had at one point in time told to, go back, sidewalk, and we'll come talk to you.
So when you arrive, EMS is not currently there.
As far as first responders go, I was, as for the video showed, the second officer there.
But there are other people who are not involved in law enforcement or first responders at all, correct?
They were already there as I was approaching.
And when you arrived, let me go back. You testified that you heard a single gunshot,
Yes, I heard a gunshot.
just one single gunshot,
Yes,
not 5 gunshots.
I heard a gunshot.
And you found a single bullet casing.
There was a casing near, and because of rendering medical aid, at one point in time it was moved. However, I made a point of it further on in the video to identify that that was it, and we still had it located. Whether I moved it, I bumped into another officer, or EMS did, at that point in time, in our chain of importance, rendering medical attention is more important at that point.
So I think you said your first, was it fair to say your first priority in responding is to preserve life, if it's possible to do so? And then the next priority might be preserving the scene.
Yes.
So your first priority when arriving was to render as much aid as you could.
Yes, when safe to do so. Again, you have to have the scene safe. Only 2 officers, 1 person, you're kind of delegating, playing off each other as far as tasks. 1 person is security. You still don't know is the individual who shot the area, etc. So going into medical aid, I had the gauze. I remember to grab it as I was getting out of the car.
The casing that was found, that was put into evidence and preserved.
I was not part of that process.
But Brice's fingerprints were not ever found on that shell, correct?
Excuse me?
Brice's fingerprints were not found on that casing.
It's not part of that process.
I believe you said that after the scene was secure, you interacted with some of the bystanders
Yes.
to try and see if anyone had seen what had happened.
Yes.
And one of the bystanders was Keith Taylor.
Yes.
And did you speak with him?
I did.
Or not? I don't think questions at this time.
Thank you, Ms. Hall.
No further questions.
Thank you. So you can step down. You're free to go. Come up prepared to call our next witness.
We are, Your Honor. The Commonwealth will call Sergeant Anthony Wilder at this time.
Thank you.
Hey, Sergeant. Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
Can you introduce yourself to the jury?
My name is Anthony Wilder, Wilder. I'm currently a sergeant with the Louisville Metro Police Department assigned to the Public Integrity Unit.
And how long have you been with the police department for?
Approximately 19 years.
And do you remember what your role was with the police department back in 2016?
From 2010 to August of 2017, I was assigned to the homicide unit.
And is that what you were doing back on May the 2nd of 2016?
Yes.
Do you remember how you became involved with this case?
I was working in the homicide office, and I was notified by radio that Second Division officers were responding to a reported shooting in the 800 block of South 41st Street. It was approximately 1 a.m. I believe it was Wednesday, May 4th, 2016.
And what was your first action that you took once you got to the scene?
Once I was on scene, I made contact with the first officer that responded to the scene, Officer Franklin. Spoke to him about what information he had learned upon his arrival. And then after that, I conducted a neighborhood canvass of the immediate area, spoke with several of the residents, and then I conducted the scene investigation for that location.
So can you explain for people that aren't familiar what goes into a neighborhood canvass?
I went door to door along that block and tried to make contact with residents to see if anybody had witnessed anything or had any information that would help with the investigation. I spoke with several of the residents, but I don't recall any specific information being provided.
And do you memorialize that search in some way?
My activities are documented in an investigative report that's provided to the lead detective and maintained in the case file.
So what do you do on the scene as far as the scene investigation goes? What's your role there?
The crime scene unit was contacted and they responded to the scene, and then they work at the direction of the detective, which in this case was me, conducting the scene investigation. Do a walk through the scene and identify items of evidentiary value. And then the crime scene unit will do a series of photographs and video to document the scene location. And then they'll collect the evidence for preservation.
I'm now going to show the witness Commonwealth's Exhibits 7 through 19. You take a look at these photos and see if they're familiar to you.
These are some of the photographs taken during the scene investigation. They show typically there'll be 3 sets of photographs taken. The first set is an overall scene, and it shows the scene as it's found. The second set, markers are placed down. They're usually like a plastic type of cone with numbers, and those are placed next to items of evidence. And then another set of photographs is taken, and then a third set is taken where the evidence is, it's a close-up of the evidence.
Why is that done?
It's just for documentation and to be able to show perspective of one piece of evidence to the other.
Okay. And we'll just go through these photos real quick. Start with the first one, and I'll go ahead and move to publish these as we go, Your Honor.
This one is marked Exhibit 7. It is one of the first overall photos.
And that's
it's showing the scene and items of clothing that were eventually collected.
this is 8.
Yes, this is just showing from a different angle the clothing.
Same with 9 and 10.
Yes, these are just showing different angles and perspectives of the scene during the first set of photographs with no markers.
All right. What about 11?
Markers in this photograph have been placed to help identify the items of evidence.
And 12.
It's the same. It's just showing a different angle.
13 through 19 together. What is this?
These will be it'll show a close-up of the marker and the item of evidence associated with that marker. So for marker number 1, I believe that's a pair of dark-colored jeans.
And picture 14, marker 2.
Marker 2 is a shell casing.
Marker 3.
Marker 3 is a kind of a plastic wristband.
4.
Is a Cricket cell phone.
5.
There's several pieces of clothing in 5. I believe there's a jacket, some white and red T-shirt, and then a cigarette butt.
And 6.
It's a red and black hat with a U of L Cardinal logo on it.
Now, were you the lead on this scene?
I was not.
So what do you do once you gather all the information and help identify what the significant evidence might be?
Once I've completed these activities, I document what I did and my findings into an investigative report. And then as the case would progress, any further assistance that's asked of me by the lead detective or as the investigation develops, I would provide further assistance and then document those activities in separate investigative reports.
Right. And 41st Street is the address of this incident was in Jefferson County, is that correct?
It was in the 800 block of South 41st Street, and that is in Jefferson County.
Right.
Detective, you were the first member of the homicide unit on scene, correct?
I was.
But you weren't the lead detective.
I was not.
And you arrived on scene about 15 minutes after the call came in.
Approximately.
So you didn't witness the shooting.
I did not.
And you arrived 15 minutes after.
After the initial 911 call. By the time I got there, the victim had been transported to the hospital and was not on scene.
So when you arrived, you never once put eyes on the victim in this case.
That's correct.
And you testified that you conducted a neighborhood canvass.
Yes.
You attempted to or spoke to a number of folks who were in the area.
Correct.
But there were no eyewitnesses to this event.
I did not identify any during my neighborhood canvass.
One of the individuals that you did interview was Keith Taylor.
Yes, I believe he was one of the first 911 callers that reported the incident.
There was another report that night of someone riding around in a bicycle carrying a gun, correct?
Officer Hendricks from the 2nd Division, he was the first officer from the 2nd Division to arrive on scene. And he did advise me that there had been a report prior to that 911 call of an individual reported to be riding around on a bicycle with a gun. I can't remember the address he gave or the location, and I don't remember how far the 800 block of 41st Street is and the location he provided. I'd have to refresh my memory with a review of my investigative letter for the location that Officer Hendricks provided for the bicyclist.
But you didn't locate this individual riding a bicycle and waving a gun?
I did not.
And there was another report of another vehicle, a Chrysler 300 on scene that night, correct?
Mr. Taylor advised from speaking with him, I learned that when he had stopped his car as he pulled up on the victim in the street, there was another car that pulled up with him. Both individuals exited their vehicle, saw the victim. Mr. Taylor called 911 and remained on scene. The driver of the other vehicle got back in his car and drove away.
And the other individual drove away in his car before the police arrived, correct?
That's my understanding from speaking with Mr. Taylor.
No more questions at this time, Your Honor.
Thank you. You redirect?
Mr. Taylor had said that he and the Chrysler both pulled up after the shooting. Is that correct?
Correct.
And I think I misquoted the date on this. It actually occurred on the 4th. It was late at night on the 3rd into the early morning of the 4th.
I believe the call came in at 1 a.m. on Wednesday, May 4th, 2016.
Thank you. No further questions.
Did the same, the first witness to the date.
All right, any recross?
Detective, were you the officer to recover the shell casing?
I was on scene. It was collected by the crime scene unit.
Was it collected while you were present?
That's correct.
And where was it located?
There was a green Camaro parked on I believe it's on the west side of the street facing south, and the shell casing was near the driver's side rear tire, which would be facing the street side.
And this casing would have been placed into evidence?
It is.
And Mr. Rhodes' fingerprints were not found on this casing, correct?
I wouldn't know about that.
No more questions.
All right, you are free to go. Thank you. We have another witness to call.
May we approach her?
Sure. Commonwealth will call their next witness.
Yes, Your Honor. The Commonwealth is going to call Detective Brice.
Good afternoon, Detective. If I could have you raise your right hand, please. Swear to tell the truth and the whole truth. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Detective. Can you introduce yourself to the jury?
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Brian Griffin. I was previously employed with the Louisville Metro Police Department, and at this time I was part of the homicide unit.
And how long were you with the homicide unit for?
I was with the homicide unit for about 2 years, employed at that time for 5 years, I believe.
And what do you do these days?
I'm a commercial real estate appraiser.
So, back in 2016, May the 4th, you were with homicide then?
I was.
And were you called to the scene in this case?
I was.
What was the first action you took when you arrived on the scene?
So when I arrived on scene, it was about 1:30 in the morning. Detective Wilder had already made his way to the scene and had started that scene investigation. When I arrived on scene, the victim had already been transported to University of Louisville Hospital. So at that point, we were conducting the scene investigation. So my first actions when I got on scene was to see what we had and then to start the neighborhood canvass.
Okay. And did anything interesting come about as a result of your neighborhood canvass?
For my part of the canvass, I was unable to locate any witnesses along in the 800 block of South 41st Street. I was canvassing house to house. I had no answers on doors. It was 1 o'clock in the morning. So on my side, the houses that I knocked on, front doors, I was not able to talk to anybody.
And do you recall a report of a guy that had a gun that was on a bicycle?
There was a report of that. I didn't have any further information on that, and I was unable to.
Was there any statements from anybody that he was in any way involved in this?
I didn't have any statements to that effect. No.
And can you tell us a little bit about the character of this neighborhood? Was it residential? What?
So the 800 block South 41st Street where this occurred is a residential neighborhood south of Broadway in the west end of Louisville. It's predominantly a residential neighborhood. There's people out. Just depends on what time of day, but there are people out at all times of day. So someone on a bike is not out of place.
And no one said that someone on a bike was at this scene
Correct.
or even on this street.
That's correct.
Okay. So did you go out to the hospital that night?
I did. Once we completed our scene investigation, I went to University of Louisville Hospital.
All right. May I approach with Commonwealth's 20?
May. You all seen this?
No objection, Judge.
Thank you.
Is this photograph familiar to you?
Yes.
What is this photograph of?
This is a picture of the victim at University of Louisville Hospital.
What's the number on it?
That's Commonwealth's 20. And had he already passed away by the time you got to the hospital?
When I arrived at the hospital, he had already succumbed to his injuries.
What did you do after that? Did you do anything else with respect to the scene?
When I went to university, we had concluded the scene investigation. It was in the middle of the street and on South 41st Street. So we concluded that scene investigation. Then I went to the hospital I believe it was Detective Baker that went to the hospital first. So we kind of split duties while people are investigating the scene. Somebody else will go to the hospital to speak with the doctors there to get a report of what's going on with the victim to get an expectation there. So as soon as I was done with the scene investigation, I went to University of Louisville Hospital to talk to the doctors there to determine time of death and the injuries that had occurred.
And did you also attend the autopsy?
I did. That it would be that same morning at that point.
And was there anything significant about the autopsy?
Other than the injuries he sustained a gunshot wound that went through his right arm and entered his right side.
So after the autopsy, after the scene, did you have any suspects on this case?
I did not.
Did you have any promising leads on the case?
I did not.
So what was the first thing that broke for you on this case?
I believe, and I would have to look at the exact dates. Roughly 2 weeks later, I received a call. I was off at the time that there was an interview. There were interviews taking place. That the individuals that were being interviewed had information on my case.
And who was that call from?
I believe it was detective. It was one of the detectives in the homicide unit, but I can't remember who exactly called me. If it was Detective Tonelli or if it was another person. I believe it might have been Detective Tonelli, but I can't remember the exact conversation.
And as a result of this phone conversation with Tonelli, what was the next step that you were able to take on your case?
So at that point on my case, I came in to witness the end of the interviews. As far as in my case, we had a statement from one of the co-defendants in this case.
And Judge, I'm going to object to any hearsay at this time.
That will be sustained if you want to go. You need to approach?
Yes.
Okay.
As a result of your investigation, did you come across any surveillance videos?
I did. I had made several attempts to recanvass the 800 block of South 41st Street where this occurred, in the hopes that it was late at night, maybe somebody would be awake the next day or subsequent days. I had the chance to go to, I believe it was 823 South 41st Street, and where I obtained some surveillance video pointing out the front of the house towards the street. I was able to collect that.
And what was significant in that video?
That video, it faces the street. It does not capture where the victim was located ultimately. However, it does show the victim walking down the street right around the time of the incident, and then it shows two vehicles that are coming up the street. They would be driving northbound prior to that, right after he walked by.
All right. And you've seen this video before.
I have.
It fairly inaccurately represents the video you recovered. Your Honor, the Commonwealth would move to admit and publish Commonwealth Exhibit 21.
Objection. All right, admitted, and you may publish.
And do you know if the timestamp on this video is accurate?
I would have to. I don't remember. I didn't look as I was watching it.
If we
If you
put the
if
last
you
clip back
rewind
up,
it would have been. So frequently, whenever I have been looking at video for surveillance on private homes, it's frequent that they're not on the correct date or the times could be off. As for instance, this is showing 5/3 of 2016 at 23:51 hours. The incident in this, for this case, it occurred on 5/4 at roughly 23:59 is when we got the call. So roughly an hour later from this, which could be from several things. If people don't change it with daylight savings time, if something like that occurs, the hours could be off by a little bit. So the timestamp on this will show within an hour of when we received a call.
no further questions.
Cross-examination.
Good afternoon.
Catherine.
I want to start off with something pretty easy. Is it Brian or Ryan
Brian with a B.
with a B? B-R-I-A-N.
Correct.
Griffin.
Yes.
That's my fault. Okay. You were lead detective on this case?
I was for this case, yes. Christopher Jones.
Did you remain lead detective on it until you left the Louisville Police Department?
I did.
Okay. Which was when?
This January 15th of 2021, 2 years ago.
A couple of things I wanted to follow up on with you. You're familiar with your report, right?
Yes.
And your initial report in this case is actually only 2 pages, right?
That's probably a fair assessment. The initial report for anything is the pertinent information on it, and we'll add to that as time goes on.
2 pages.
Probably.
In that report, you indicate that there was a shot followed by 5 more shots.
I believe that was what the call came in as, that there was the caller for the dispatch run said that they heard a shot and then 5 additional shots.
So today, you would agree that that was incorrect.
I was not there at the scene to be able to say whether that was incorrect or not. She could have heard a total of 6 shots. I don't know. I can't speak to what she did here.
Okay. Well, you were the lead detective. There wasn't evidence of 6 shots.
There was not evidence of 6 shots, correct?
Nonetheless, your report indicates 1 plus 5. Right?
That was the initial call, yes. From the call taker.
But you don't have, you have the ability with, I know those reports are done by computer, right?
Correct.
And when you figure out something's wrong, like an error, right, you can go back in and fix it.
Correct.
But you did not.
I did not correct the initial call taker's, what she took from the person who called in. Correct. I left it as it was called in to dispatch.
You didn't include a correction that says, in our investigation, we determined, in fact, it was only 1 shot.
I did not, and I did not change the initial report to change it from what the call taker took as it came in to say that there was only 1 gunshot recovered or 1 shell casing recovered or 1 gunshot that was heard, because the call came in that there was a gunshot and then she heard 5 additional. Whether it was accurate or correct, it still was something that was called into dispatch, and that's how we received the initial call. So to preserve what we received initially, that was left the same.
Let's talk about this 1 shell casing.
Okay.
That shell casing was still present on the ground when you got to the scene?
Yes,
And it was collected.
it was.
It was tested.
Yes,
That's one of the routine things that lead detective does, make sure everything gets tested, right?
yes, sir.
And in fact, one of the things it was tested for was fingerprints.
Yeah, it was tested for fingerprints, but I'll let you ask the question.
Okay, thank you. And Brice's fingerprints were not on the shell casing.
No, sir.
And the reason we test for fingerprints is because things like shell casings actually do take fingerprints.
They do, and they often also burn off from the shot.
I want to ask you about another aspect of the case. You went to the autopsy,
Correct.
which was
The morning of the 4th.
okay. All right. It was the same day?
Yes.
Okay. I
It was
wasn't
by
sure.
the time that we finished the scene and I went to University of Louisville, it would have been about 4 or something in the morning. And then it would have gone over to the autopsy right after.
Okay. And you're familiar with the contents of that report?
Yes,
You were present at the autopsy.
I was.
In addition to the injury from the bullet, the single bullet, right? There also was an injury to his head.
Yes, sir.
That was documented. You were able to see that, right?
Yes,
And that was also documented on the autopsy report
I believe so.
and was observed by the medical examiner.
Yes.
Now, it's fair to say that I think you talked about doing a neighborhood canvass, right?
Yes, sir.
Your report indicates that you knocked on 5 doors.
I did. There was additional detective there that was doing an additional canvas on the additional side of the road within the immediate area.
Now, you've talked about things a few weeks later. It would be 18 days later, something like that.
Roughly, yes.
Roughly 18 days later. From the 4th, during, say, the next week, the week after that, there's no indication that you did any follow-up work on this case.
That's not entirely true. There was additional follow-up done. I followed up with the leads that we had. There was additional cell phone search warrant that was done for the victim's cell phone, as well as additional canvases that occurred that did not yield any results.
Looking at your reports, I think you said before when you were asked by the prosecution, you didn't really have any leads.
They were not the leads on this case were not very good.
You may not have recall of this next question, but I'm going to ask anyway. About how many murder cases would you say you had? You were working in homicide.
Correct. Were you asking that I was the lead on or that I worked on in general?
That is a fair follow-up question. I meant as lead.
Okay. I would have to get the exact for you. It was within around 10.
Okay. And that's fine. I was looking for the ballpark. I was curious. And then how many additional ones that you were not lead?
That I was not lead that we worked on?
That you were part of. Do you guys do it all by teams?
It just depends on the situation. It depends on the amount of cases that are being worked at the same time, depending on the day. It varies, unfortunately. But we worked over 100 cases a year, and I was there for a couple of years. I did not work every single case, but a fair amount in some form or fashion.
I think I did a bad job asking my question. I'm going to ask it better. In May of 2016, how many cases would you have had open either as lead or as part of a team?
This would have been the only homicide that I had open as a lead.
And then as part of a team?
As part of a team, I would have to look. I don't have that number.
Sure. I know you don't have the number, but I just meant,
I worked several, but I was also working non-fatal shootings as well. So I couldn't give a 7 years ago. I can't remember the exact number of cases from that one.
Okay. You were unable to find any other leads the next day, the next week, week after?
Yes, sir.
Why'd you leave the Louisville Police Department?
Family reasons, sir.
I have no further questions.
Your redirect?
Briefly, Your Honor. You mentioned someone had come forward and said that they heard one shot and then 5.
Yes, I believe that was the initial call for the call for service that came to dispatch, that came through dispatch for patrol to respond to.
And it was phrased that way as 1 and then 5.
Correct.
If somebody had heard 6 shots at once, you'd think they would just say they heard 6 shots.
That would be what I would assume. In the area that was in, it is not uncommon for there to be multiple different gunshots from different areas that would be audible in the same area.
And I guess the question was asked, because someone gives a statement that has facts in it that don't jive with what other people said or what your theory of the case is, you don't get to go back and change what they said, right?
Correct. That was what I heard. It would be, after going to the scene and seeing one shell casing, to amend it to say there would be one would be fair. But the call came in that there was one shot and then an additional 5. Whether that's accurate or inaccurate, I left that there for transparency.
What you do know is there was one shot at yours.
Correct.
Was anybody's fingerprint identified on the case?
No.
So there were no fingerprints on the case. It wasn't
That's correct.
just that Brice Rhodes' fingerprints weren't on the case. Nobody's.
Correct.
Do you recall when you saw an injury to the victim? You mentioned his head. Where on his head was the injury?
I would have to look at the report to be sure. I can't. 7 years ago, I can't remember the head injury very clearly.
Do you remember seeing the head injury when he was laying in the street before he got medical attention? Or do you remember seeing the head injury at the hospital or at the autopsy?
It would have been at the hospital or autopsy because I did not see the victim on the scene. When I arrived on scene, he had already been transported to U of L while they were trying to give him medical attention.
No further questions, John.
All right. You're free to go, Detective Griffin. Thank you. Go on, approach. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to break for the evening, but I'm going to read the admonition again. Before you go, please recall my earlier order. You are not to do any research on this case or post information about this case. If you accidentally encounter information about the case from any source, it is your duty to bring it immediately to the attention of the court. Also, if anyone tries to speak to you about the case, tell them you are under an order not to discuss it and that you cannot continue to discuss it. I'm going to ask you all to be back outside the courtroom tomorrow morning at 9:30 a.m. And don't forget your phones. Thank you.
All rise for the jury.
Oh, yes, sir.
Our notes.
Just leave them here. Yep, just put them face down and leave them here.
Thank you.
Just-